Have you ever wondered why someone can seem deeply interested in you one moment, then suddenly become distant the moment the connection starts feeling real? Why can an avoidant person move closer, open up, enjoy your presence, and then act as if they suddenly need less of you? And what if that distance is not always a sign that the feelings disappeared? What if, for some people, love becomes frightening precisely when it starts becoming important? This is where avoidant attachment becomes so confusing. Because you may expect love to move in one direction. You meet someone, you connect, the bond grows, the feelings become stronger, and naturally you expect the person to come closer. But an avoidant person may experience that same emotional growth very differently. The closer the bond becomes, the more their inner defenses can become active. Research on adult attachment links avoidance with discomfort around intimacy, strong self-reliance, and strategies that reduce awareness of attachment needs when closeness feels threatening. And this creates one of the most painful misunderstandings in relationships. You see distance, so you assume rejection. You see silence, so you assume indifference. You see them pulling away, so you start questioning everything. You wonder whether you were too much, whether you moved too quickly, whether you were not attractive enough, whether someone else became more interesting. But sometimes, the real battle is happening inside the other person. Their mind may be trying to protect independence at the exact moment their emotions are becoming attached. This is the first stage of what can feel like falling in love backwards, resistance. An avoidant may not experience emotional closeness as simple comfort. For them, intimacy can also represent vulnerability. It can mean being seen, being needed, being emotionally responsible for another person. It can create the feeling that someone is getting close enough to affect them. And when that happens, the mind may reach for protection. Instead of moving toward the feeling, it may move away from it. This is not an excuse for unhealthy behavior. It is an explanation of a psychological pattern. There is a difference between understanding someone and tolerating everything they do. You can understand why someone withdraws without chasing them into withdrawal. You can recognize their fear without making their fear your responsibility. That distinction matters because when someone pulls away, your first instinct may be to close the distance. You may send another message. Explain yourself again. Ask what changed. Give more reassurance. Try harder to prove that you are safe. You may believe that if you can just love them correctly, they will finally stop running. But love does not work that way. When a person is already feeling pressured by emotional closeness, more pressure rarely creates deeper safety. It can create the opposite. Attachment research describes avoidant patterns as involving deactivating strategies where emotional needs may be pushed down and distance control and self-reliance become ways of managing discomfort. So imagine what happens inside that person when the relationship begins becoming serious. Instead of simply thinking, I really care about this person, another part of the mind may quietly ask, what will this cost me? Will I lose my freedom? What happens if they expect more from me? What happens if I become dependent? What happens if they see the parts of me I normally keep hidden? Those questions can create an emotional conflict. One part of them wants connection. Another part wants control. One part enjoys your presence. Another part becomes uncomfortable with how much your presence matters. One part may miss you. Another part tells them they should be fine without you. That is why their behavior can look so contradictory. The contradiction is not always between love and no love. Sometimes it is between attachment and protection. And this is where you need to hear something important. Their internal conflict is not a verdict on your value. You can be loving and still be rejected. You can be patient and still be met with distance. You can offer genuine connection and still encounter someone who does not know how to receive it. That does not make your love meaningless. It means another person's emotional capacity is not a measurement of your worth. Psychology teaches us that people often protect themselves according to patterns they have learned over time. Those patterns can become automatic. An avoidant person may not consciously decide, I am going to push away the person I care about. The distancing can become part of how they regulate uncomfortable emotions. And this is why chasing their affection can slowly become dangerous for you. Because every time they pull away, you may feel the need to prove yourself. Every unanswered message can become a challenge. Every cold response can make you want to become warmer. Every sign of distance can make you work harder for closeness. Slowly, the relationship stops being about two people connecting. It becomes about one person trying to earn access to another person's emotions. And you were never meant to live that way. Real strength begins when you stop measuring yourself by someone else's ability to come closer. You can care deeply without abandoning your dignity. You can love someone without making their attention the source of your peace. You can give someone space without sitting around waiting for them to choose you. Because sometimes, when the pressure disappears, something unexpected happens. The person who was focused on escaping the intensity finally has enough quiet to hear what was underneath it. They begin to notice the absence. They begin to remember the connection. They begin to feel what they were too defended to feel while you were standing right in front of them. And that is where the story changes. So stay until the end, because the next stage reveals why distance can sometimes make an avoidant more aware of their attachment, and why the moment they finally begin feeling what they once pushed away can completely change the emotional dynamic. But what happens after the emotional pressure begins to fade? What happens when there is no longer a constant conversation, no immediate reassurance, and no one standing in front of them asking for an answer? This is where the second stage begins. The mind gets quieter, and in that quiet, feelings that were once easy to dismiss can become much harder to ignore. When an avoidant person has been using emotional distance to stay comfortable, constant closeness can keep their attention focused on what feels overwhelming. They may notice expectations, conversations, responsibilities, or the fear of becoming too dependent. But when the connection is no longer demanding their attention, their mind can start processing the relationship from another angle. Instead of thinking about what felt uncomfortable, they may begin noticing what is missing. This is the stage of awareness. And awareness can arrive slowly. It may begin with something very ordinary. They remember a conversation that once seemed unimportant. They think about the way you understood something without demanding an explanation. They notice that their daily routine feels different. A familiar moment suddenly carries emotional weight. Nothing dramatic has to happen. Sometimes the smallest reminder opens a door that the mind had kept closed. This is one reason emotional absence can feel different from emotional rejection. When someone is constantly available, their presence can become part of the background of everyday life. You know they are there. You assume another conversation will happen. You know another message may arrive. There is little reason for the mind to fully confront what that person means. But when that availability changes, the brain has fewer distractions. The silence creates room for comparison, and comparison can reveal value. The person may begin asking questions they avoided before. Why does this person still cross my mind? Why do I notice their absence? Why does someone else not create the same feeling? Why did I become uncomfortable when things were going well? Why did I distance myself from something I actually cared about? These questions matter because emotional understanding often comes after the behavior, not before it. Someone can act first and understand their emotions later. They can create distance before realizing what the connection meant to them. They can protect themselves from something before recognizing that they were protecting themselves from something valuable. But do not misunderstand this stage. Missing someone is not the same as being ready for a relationship. Thinking about someone does not automatically mean emotional growth has happened. Feeling lonely does not equal commitment. Regret does not automatically create maturity. A person can experience powerful emotions and still return to the same old habits. That is why your role during this stage is not to become a detective searching for hidden signs. Your role is to keep building your own life. This is where your power changes. When you stop organizing your days around another person's behavior, you begin recovering parts of yourself that may have been placed on hold. You start making decisions because they are right for you, not because they might produce a reaction from someone else. You begin sleeping without checking your phone every few minutes. You begin enjoying your routine again. You reconnect with goals that had nothing to do with the relationship, and something powerful happens when you do that. You stop trying to control an outcome you never truly controlled. Psychological research on attachment suggests that people with avoidant tendencies may use strategies that reduce awareness of attachment-related emotions, especially when intimacy becomes uncomfortable. When the immediate source of pressure is removed, those emotions may become more noticeable. That does not mean silence is a trick, it means space can expose reality. If someone genuinely cares, distance may give them the opportunity to recognize what they previously pushed aside. If they do not care, distance can reveal that too. Either way, you receive information that constant chasing could never give you. And this is an important lesson about strength. Sometimes the answer you want does not come from getting closer. It comes from stepping back far enough to see clearly. You cannot force someone into emotional awareness. You cannot explain your worth into another person's mind. You cannot argue someone into becoming ready. You can only decide what kind of treatment you are willing to accept. That decision changes everything. Because once you stop trying to convince someone to value you, your emotional energy becomes available for something better. Growth, purpose, confidence, peace. You become less focused on whether they are thinking about you and more focused on whether the life you are creating deserves your full attention. And ironically, this is often when the emotional dynamic becomes clearer. The avoidant may begin remembering the comfort they once overlooked. They may recognize that your presence offered something they did not fully appreciate at the time. They may compare new interactions with the emotional experience they had with you. They may realize that escaping discomfort also meant losing access to something meaningful. But the deeper realization is not simply, I miss this person. It is, I helped create this distance. That thought can be uncomfortable, because now there is no easy way to blame the connection itself. They may have to look at their own choices. They may have to recognize that the person they pushed away did not necessarily create the problem. Their own fear of closeness may have influenced the outcome. And that is where self-awareness can begin. The mind that once said, I need space, may eventually ask, why did I need so much space? The mind that once said, I am better alone, may wonder, was I actually protecting my peace or protecting myself from vulnerability? The mind that once dismissed emotional needs may begin understanding that needing connection does not make a person weak. This is a major psychological turning point. Yet there is still one final barrier. Knowing that you care is one thing. Being willing to act differently because you care is something else entirely. A person can recognize their feelings and still run from them. They can understand what they lost and still refuse to change. They can miss you deeply and still repeat the same pattern. So the real question is no longer whether the feelings exist. The real question is whether the person can tolerate the vulnerability those feelings require, because love becomes meaningful only when awareness turns into action. And that brings us to the final stage, the moment when an avoidant has to face the very thing they spent so much energy avoiding, genuine emotional closeness. The final shift begins with a difficult truth. Recognizing your feelings does not automatically make you capable of handling them. A person can understand what someone means to them and still feel the urge to escape. They can know that a connection matters and still become uncomfortable when emotional closeness asks them to be vulnerable. This is why the third stage is not about suddenly becoming romantic, expressive, or emotionally perfect. It is about developing the courage to remain present when old defenses tell them to disappear. This is where attachment begins moving from instinct to choice. An avoidant person may have spent years believing that independence means never needing anyone. They may have learned to solve everything alone, hide discomfort, minimize emotional needs, and keep difficult feelings under control. That strategy can create a sense of safety, but there is a hidden cost. When self-protection becomes the only way to feel secure, intimacy can start looking like a threat instead of a source of connection. Eventually, something has to change, not because another person demanded it, not because someone chased them harder, but because they begin realizing that complete emotional distance also has consequences. Freedom without connection can become isolation. Control without vulnerability can become loneliness. Independence without emotional openness can become a life where nobody is allowed close enough to truly know you. That realization can be painful, but pain can also become a doorway. The person starts questioning old beliefs. Maybe being cared for does not mean being controlled. Maybe expressing affection does not mean surrendering independence. Maybe allowing someone to matter does not mean losing yourself. Maybe commitment is not a prison. Maybe closeness does not have to erase individuality. These are not small changes. They represent a new way of understanding relationships. And when this begins happening, behavior becomes more important than emotion. Anyone can miss someone. Anyone can feel attraction. Anyone can experience regret after losing access to a meaningful connection. But emotional maturity appears when a person begins doing something different with those feelings. They communicate instead of disappearing. They explain instead of leaving someone confused. They acknowledge mistakes instead of protecting their image. They become more consistent instead of appearing only when loneliness becomes uncomfortable. They learn to tolerate difficult conversations instead of treating every disagreement as a reason to leave. That is what separates temporary emotion from real transformation. You should remember this because it protects you from one of the biggest traps in relationships. Someone returning does not automatically mean the relationship has changed. A message does not equal healing. An apology does not equal growth. Strong chemistry does not equal emotional readiness. The evidence is always in what happens after the emotion appears. If they truly want something healthier, their behavior eventually has to become safer, clearer, and more dependable. And this is where your own journey matters just as much. You cannot complete another person's emotional development for them. You can encourage honesty, but you cannot create it. You can offer kindness, but you cannot force openness. You can give another chance, but you cannot guarantee that they will use it wisely. Their healing belongs to them. Your healing belongs to you. That distinction can save you from spending years waiting for potential. Because sometimes we fall in love not only with who someone is, but with who we believe they could become. We imagine the day they finally understand. We picture the moment they finally communicate properly. We hold on to the possibility that one day everything will make sense. But your life cannot be built around an imagined version of another person. You deserve something that exists in reality. You deserve connection that does not require constant guessing. You deserve affection that does not leave you questioning your worth. You deserve communication that does not make you feel like you are asking for too much simply because you want emotional honesty. And if an avoidant genuinely reaches this third stage, the relationship can begin taking a different shape. There may still be hesitation. There may still be uncomfortable moments. Growth does not erase someone's personality overnight. But there is a crucial difference. Instead of automatically obeying the urge to withdraw, they begin noticing it. They recognize the discomfort and choose a healthier response. That is emotional freedom. Freedom is not having no fear. Freedom is having fear without allowing it to control every decision. A person becomes stronger when they can say, "This feels uncomfortable, but I am willing to talk about it." They become stronger when they can admit, "I care about you and that scares me." They become stronger when they stop pretending that needing another human being is a weakness. That kind of honesty can completely change the meaning of love, because real intimacy is not created when two people never feel afraid. It is created when both people become willing to remain honest while fear is present. And this brings us back to the strange idea of falling in love backwards. First comes resistance, then comes awareness, finally comes acceptance. But acceptance is not simply accepting another person. It is accepting the truth about yourself, accepting that you have needs, accepting that closeness can feel uncomfortable, accepting that emotional connection requires risk, accepting that protecting yourself from every possible disappointment also protects you from experiencing genuine intimacy. For the person on the receiving end, there is an equally powerful lesson. Do not measure your value by how quickly someone recognizes it. Do not shrink your needs to make another person comfortable. Do not turn patience into endless waiting. Do not confuse potential with commitment. And never believe that someone else's emotional limitations determine how lovable you are. Sometimes the greatest transformation happens when you stop asking, "How can I make them choose me?" and begin asking, "What kind of relationship am I willing to choose for myself?" That question changes your entire direction. It moves you from waiting to living, from proving to knowing, from chasing an outcome to protecting your future. And if the other person grows, becomes honest, and learns how to meet you with genuine effort, then you can decide whether their new behavior deserves a place in your life. If they do not grow, you still have not lost. Because the goal was never to win an avoidant. The goal was to become so grounded in your own worth that you no longer need someone else's uncertainty to tell you who you are. That is the deepest lesson behind loving an emotionally distant person. You cannot control the speed of someone else's awakening, but you can decide how long you will remain asleep to your own value. And once you understand that, the story stops being about whether they eventually come closer. It becomes about whether the connection in front of you is capable of meeting the person you have become. The most important realization comes after everything we have explored. You cannot build your future around another person's emotional timing. The three stages may explain why an avoidant can move through resistance, awareness, and acceptance in an unusual order. But understanding a pattern does not mean surrendering your life to it. Psychology can help you see the mechanism, it can help you understand why certain reactions happen, but understanding someone does not require you to keep standing at the same door, hoping it will finally open. There is a difference between being patient and putting your life on pause. Patience has direction. Waiting without limits does not. One allows room for healthy development, the other slowly turns uncertainty into a lifestyle. When you constantly monitor another person's behavior, your attention becomes trapped outside yourself. Your mood depends on a message. Your confidence depends on their interest. Your peace depends on whether they seem distant or warm. Without realizing it, you begin handing someone else control over your emotional state. That is the point where love can become self-abandonment, and you were not created to disappear inside another person's confusion. A healthy connection should add depth to your life, not require you to sacrifice your identity to maintain it. You should still have ambitions that belong to you, friendships that nourish you, goals that excite you, quiet moments where you are not analyzing anyone, a future that does not depend on whether another person finally understands what they feel. This matters especially when dealing with someone who has difficulty with closeness. Their internal process may be complicated, but your boundaries do not need to be. You can care about their struggles while remaining clear about your standards. You can understand why they need space without accepting indefinite emotional neglect. You can recognize their fears without becoming responsible for managing them. That is emotional maturity from your side. And there is something else worth understanding. Sometimes the person who appears to have the most power in a relationship is actually the person who is most controlled by fear. They may look calm, detached, unbothered, completely independent, but emotional avoidance can create a very narrow life. If every meaningful bond is pushed away whenever vulnerability appears, then protection eventually becomes its own form of imprisonment. A locked door keeps danger outside, but it also keeps love outside. That is the paradox. The same defense that protects a person from rejection can also prevent them from experiencing genuine closeness. The same emotional distance that creates temporary comfort can create long-term loneliness. The same habit of saying, "I do not need anyone," can eventually become a barrier against the very connection that person secretly wants. This does not mean you should try to rescue them from that prison. You cannot. Only they can decide to open the door. And that decision may require more than missing you. It may require self-reflection, it may require therapy, honest conversations, emotional education, or simply the willingness to notice their own patterns instead of automatically obeying them. Real change usually asks a person to become uncomfortable in a new way. They must learn to sit with emotions rather than immediately escaping them. That process can be slow, but slow does not mean impossible. A person can learn new responses. They can become more secure. They can discover that closeness does not have to mean losing control. They can develop the ability to express needs without shame and receive another person's needs without feeling trapped. Human beings are not frozen forever in the patterns they learned earlier in life. Yet you should never confuse someone's capacity for growth with evidence that they are currently growing. Look at what exists today, not what might happen next year, not what they promised during an emotional moment, not what you believe they feel deep inside. Look at the pattern you can actually experience. Do they communicate? Do they respect your boundaries? Do they take responsibility? Do they make room for your emotions? Do their actions create stability rather than confusion? These questions bring you back to reality. Because love is not only an emotion inside someone's private world, love becomes meaningful through behavior. It becomes visible through choices. It becomes trustworthy through consistency. This is why the strongest position you can take is not emotional punishment, strategic silence, or trying to trigger someone's fear of losing you. Those methods keep you emotionally connected to the same cycle. Instead, choose clarity, choose dignity, choose a life where your happiness does not depend on whether another person suddenly becomes available. There is tremendous power in reaching the point where you can say, "I care about you, but I will not lose myself trying to reach you." That sentence contains both compassion and strength. You are not becoming cold, you are becoming clear, you are not denying your feelings, you are refusing to let those feelings control your standards. You are not pretending that the relationship meant nothing. You are accepting that meaning alone is not enough to create a healthy future. And perhaps that is the real transformation hidden inside the idea of avoidance falling in love backwards. The biggest change may not happen inside the avoidant at all. It may happen inside you. At first you may have wanted an explanation, then you wanted reassurance. Then you wanted proof that the connection mattered. Eventually, you begin wanting something deeper, peace. That shift is powerful because peace does not require you to know exactly what another person thinks. You no longer need to decode every pause. You no longer need to turn every small action into evidence. You no longer need to create an entire story around a single message. You can observe, you can decide, you can move forward. And if one day that person returns with genuine emotional maturity, you will not have to rush toward them simply because you missed them. You will be able to evaluate what they are offering with a clear mind. You can ask whether their presence fits the life you have built. You can look at their actions instead of being carried away by old memories. That is what makes growth so powerful. You stop asking whether you are enough for them. You start asking whether what they offer is enough for you. And that question can change everything. Because the ultimate victory is not making an avoidant fall deeply in love with you. The ultimate victory is becoming deeply rooted in yourself. When you reach that place, someone's hesitation no longer defines your value, their distance no longer determines your direction, their return can be welcomed, but it is not required for you to move forward. You become the person who no longer needs to be chosen to feel worthy, and from that position, love becomes healthier. If they are ready, you can meet them. If they are not, you can release them. Either way, you continue becoming stronger. Because your life was never supposed to be a waiting room for someone else's emotional awakening. Your life is happening now. And the person you become while someone else is figuring themselves out may be far more important than whether they eventually figure it out at all.